Hello, my name is Jason Reed. For the next few moments, I'll explain why I feel the XML programming is the most important out of the given topics for selection for this week. Before I get started, though, I just want to thank everyone for their interactions over the last 7 weeks. It's been a true pleasure to interact with you all and have your insight in our weekly discussion questions. And I want to wish everyone a happy new year and a good luck in their future studies. So back on track here. So being the fact that I'm in the military, I've grown to live by a set of rules, more so policies, orders, and directives, right? So they give us general direction on how we're supposed to do things from the time we join the military until the time we get out of the military. Right? There's an order or directive that tells us how to do everything, and we follow those because that's the standard, right? And so it's very similar how these programming languages are, right? So XML is no different, right? There's a set standard form of rules essentially that you need to adhere to, and doing so, gets you out of XML jail. No, and in doing so, gets you holding to the standards, right? And so those standards are important because if you're developing an XML and then you're sharing that information out, you as a person who wants to pull that XML data, are assuming that the creator of the data is actually formatting it to the standard because you may have created an application per se that's pulling that data out, and if it's not formatted correctly, well then the data is worthless to you, right? So then you've got to go in and figure out where the mistakes are and why that person didn't adhere to said standard, right? So the W3C, they created XML, and from the earlier instances, it wasn't XML, it was the standard generalized markup language, SGML, right? And if you want to read some more about it, obviously there's, like with most things, there's standards, right? So there's an International Organization of Standards, 8879, that talks about the SGML and what governing rules of structure and formatting. Well, so XML originally was designed to meet the challenges of large-scale electronic publishing, and in doing so, the formatting needed to be standard, right? And it needed to be easily transitioned from point A to point B, so the data needed to move rapidly, so it didn't need a lot of overhead, right? So it needed to be very lean in conveying the most amount of information with the least amount of pull on the network, if you will, right? So XML, like anything, it's comprises some basic standards, and those standards allow for many developers to develop applications that can utilize that information when you code to XML. One of the examples I like to use is the metadata, right? So metadata, thinking back to like the databases where you have this large database with all this information, and it's like, well, how do I structure it? How do I get it all together? Well, you could use something like an ID tag or an attribute to the ID, or in this example, right, a student ID. So this university, you've got all these students, and you need to filter through, who's who, and so with the student ID tag associates now that student and everything about that student under that one ID number, right? Or you could say like your social security number, right? That's you, and it tells a lot about you, right? It's that one tag number, it's that metadata about you. It's got all that information about said individual, right? So the structure itself is pretty simple, right? So it's not as complex as any other of the languages I've come across. It's got its normal opening head that lets you know that you're developing an XML, what formats you're writing in as far as the UFT, and then you've got your standard, opening headings, and you've got to close everything, and it's very simplistically written, and that simplistically written information, as I said a minute ago, can be transmitted, and then also the information can be utilized by other companies. And since it was W3C curated language, there is no corporate tariff or tax or application fee or royalty or anything like that that goes into using the information. It's open sourced, and so that's huge. So it isn't something like Java, where you've got to pay Sun an arm and a leg to develop in Java, and then certain companies don't want to use it because they don't want to pay the royalties, or Adobe creating their own standard for PDFs and you can't, or WinZip, or all these other companies that create these stovepipe things that are really useful, but you got to pay to play. So with XML you don't. You're kind of raw, if you will. So I was leaning towards using validation because I think validation helps. It definitely has helped me in this course, is being able to run my XML information through a validator and be able to have some feedback saying, hey, ding dong, you forgot to close this tag, or this wasn't spelled correctly, or any of these things. But I really think if you don't know the programming language itself, and you don't understand how information needs to be structured and what goes where, then it's kind of like, well, you can't even get to the validation point yet until you understand the code itself, right? You understand how to walk in the XML world. So that's why I thought it was more important, is the programming itself. And keeping everything online, right? So W3C doesn't just create something and then just let it walk away, right? So they're always checking and balancing things. And so there's several working groups that W3C runs in order to keep XML, again, a good standard format and free flowing and interchangeable between multiple formats. And so they've got a XLT working group that's responsible for the transformations. We've got an efficiency interchange working group that's responsible for developing and exchanging XML documents in ways that are efficient and are practical without compromising interoperability. So again, going back to a lot of folks use that XML information, and so if they make a change, who's going to suffer from that, right? And then finally, there's a XML query group, and obviously that is using your XQuery or XPath. And how information is exchanged, right? So now they're looking at the formatting information, and then how the information is actually being exchanged by various entities, right? Something I found was interesting is, if you're really into XML, like with anything else, there's always a conference for something. So it looks like there's a conference called the BALSAGE. It goes every August in Maryland. It's I guess it's, if you're a geek of markup languages, this is the place to be, kind of thing. So if you find yourself in Maryland in August and you're really into XML, I guess you can go there. I guess that's all I have to say about that subject. So thank you all.